Yes, Sridhri, you can start your presentation. Is Sridhri now fifth batch? Sridhri will present error estimation. Once the presentation from Sridhri is over, then the last batch, Vignesh and Vikas will continue with condition numbers.
Can I start?
Yes, go ahead.
Good afternoon to everyone present here. So I'm sure my friends would have taken you through different types of errors. So there's another classification of errors which I'll brief about it, and then we'll look at error estimation. So first classification is systematic and random errors. Sana, could you go ahead once?
Can you ask?
Yeah. So what is measurement error? So measurement error is the difference between the measured quantity and its true value. These are classified into random errors and systematic errors. Random errors are errors that occur naturally in any experiment. So let's look at it in little more detail. And systematic error is caused by miscalibration of instruments which affects the measurement. Random error. So random errors, there's no definite trend in reading. Suppose once we get, suppose an example of a blood pressure, normally from the normal value, it deviates when we're under stress or after a physical exercise. So these are temporary errors, as in they do not stay stable for a long time and they cannot be replicated every time by an experiment. The next is the systematic error. Systematic error can be quantified and it can be it is well defined. For example, given here, if we take if there's mistake in an instrument which shows if it shows 2 kg instead of 1 kg, so when we measure the person's weight, everything will be added by 1 kg. So this is systematic error. This is further classified into 4 categories. One is instrumental, environmental, observational, and theoretical. So now let's look at what is instrumental. Instrumental error. So it occurs when there is miscalibration or the markings are not proper in the instrument. For example, the zero error in vernier calipers and in screw gauge, which is used to measure the thickness and the diameter respectively. So what is zero error? When the main scale let's take an example of a vernier calipers here. When the main scale, the zero of main scale coincides with the zero of vernier caliper, then we say there is no error. But then if the scale of vernier does not coincide with zero of main scale, then there is said to be a zero error. Zero errors are of two types. One is positive zero error and negative zero error. When the zero of the vernier calipers is above the zero of the main scale, then there is a positive error, and if it's below, then it is known as the negative zero error. So here, as you can see, is the presentation of how do we calculate or find the zero error. So here the main scale reading is 3.3, and the the error shown here is plus 0.04. So we add the zero error here and we to get the final value. The point to note here is in the negative error we do the minus of minus. So the error gets added in the negative zero error, whereas it gets subtracted when there is a positive zero error. The second type is the instrumental error. Instrumental errors are due to the surroundings where we are doing the experiment. That is the speed, wind speed, then magnetic presence, temperature, humidity, and all those stuff. Like for example, the metal expands when the temperature increases. So while performing the performing the experiments with the pendulum, there are high chances that the metal increases in length slightly, but in idealistic cases, we do not consider these changes. So this may lead to a little deviation from what we are actually expecting. So here's the formula to calculate the time period of a pendulum. As you can see, the length depends upon the temperature, and which in turn depends upon changes the time period. One more point to note here is that we are taking alpha sine theta here. Also, we are neglecting the higher terms, so which is again a cause of the error. If we need a very precise value, we need to go for higher terms, but they are very small in nature, so idealistically we ignore them. The next is the observational error. Observational error are mostly due to miscalculation, or it is due to more of a human error. For example, here is the parallax error, which is very common. Even while we measure with a normal scale, we tend to cause that error. This is because the line of sight changes and so does the measurement. As you can see here, the point O is the right way of reading any scale. The right and the left ones will give a wrong reading. The next one is theoretical error. Again, it is from the uncertainties of a prediction.
Yes, just a minute, Sri. Just a minute.
Yes,
Will you
sir.
please go back to the last slide?
Yes, sir.
Yes, yes. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. So here is the error. Here we consider the temperature do not change, atmospheric factors remain same. So this results in our calculation becoming more easy. If we consider them to vary, then that it involves a lot of complications. So we tend to ignore all these effects, and this leads to the theoretical error. So I'll give an example of where the errors were disastrous. So this is a Patriot missile failure. It happened during the Gulf War 1991. So the software truncated the 24-bit number. That is, it stopped the expansion of a series after 24-bit number. So when this error is multiplied by a large number, it leads to a significant error, and this led to the missile missing the target by 4 seconds, and this led to the cause of death of more than 100 people there. So as you can see, when the small errors are multiplied by a large number, then it becomes very significant there. Another example, this is not due to numerical, but still it's due to the human error. This error was the conversion from pounds to liters. As you know, 1 pound is equal to 2.2 kg a liter. So the Air Canada, they didn't convert the unit from pound to kg. They thought they had double the times of fuel with them, but then it turns out they had filled in number of kilograms and not in terms of pound. So that caused them to have lesser fuel than what they actually thought, and they had to do an emergency landing, though there were no loss of life here. But at times this becomes a subject of concern. The pilot who were responsible for this had been suspended after this incident. Now here comes the important part, that is the error estimation. So why do we need to do the error estimation? This is done so that we get a better result, so that our results are more accurate. The common way is by how do we take the values? It's usually we perform a set of experiments repeatedly and we take their average. So the average is given, like suppose we have n number of values, so it is x1 plus x2. We take different readings and divide them by total number of readings. So we get the average of a reading. For example, as you can see here, so the time is given here at when the ball is thrown up in the height of 3 meters. So the different time readings are given here. So we take the mean of this data to arrive at a more precise values of time. This may not be equal to any of the readings which we had originally taken. So as you can see, we add all the data that we have here and then divide it by the number of experiments that we have done. The next is the uncertainty in mean. As there is uncertainty in measurement, there is uncertainty in mean also. So this can be calculated in various ways. So the simplest estimate, as you can see here, is by taking the range of two numbers and taking their average. So as in the previous slide, the maximum value is 1.18 and the minimum value is 1.02. So we take the difference here and then divide it by 2 and we get the how much does our error vary. So it's plus or minus the average of the range. This is for a simple, when we have simple calculations, but then if we have a large number of values or if we have a very large number of experiments, then there are different ways of calculating uncertainty in mean. One is the standard deviation. As you can see, the standard deviation formula is given here, which is the sum of the each individual reading minus the mean the whole square divided by number of values that we have here. You can see the formulas given here. So here's one more example. Here we know what a Maclaurin and a Taylor series is. The Maclaurin series is more of a Taylor series, but then we consider it to be starting point as a 0 here. So here is a question which says given f of x is 1 by 1 minus x, we need to approximate it to f of 0.1, which is a second order Maclaurin polynomial, and find the error. So here is the general formula of Maclaurin series. The binomial expansion of 1 minus 1 by x can be written as x power 0 plus x power 1 and x power 2, since they have asked a second order Maclaurin polynomial. If they ask a third order, then we go up to the x power 3 term. So 1 by 1 minus x can be written as 1 plus x squared plus x cubed. So we find P2 is the value of the Maclaurin series here. So they have said at 0.1. So it is 1 plus 0. We in place of x we substitute 0.1 here. So we get 1 plus 0.1 and 0.1 square, which is 1.11. Then f of 0.1. F of 0.1 is we substitute the value 0.1 in the original f of x. That is 1 by 1 minus x. So as you can see, we get 1 by 1 minus 0.1, which is 1 by 0.9. So the error is the absolute value of the actual value and the estimated. So we estimate the value to be 1.11, but the actual value is 1.1111. So the error is the difference between them in the absolute sense. So as you can see, there's an error of 0.001111 in the reading. This one, the previous one was for a continuous series. Here we look at for the alternating series. Alternating series is given by the general formula of minus 1 power n b of n, where b of n are terms here. So the remainder as 0 is found by looking at the first neglected term. So here, as you can see in the question says find the error involved in calculating the sum of first 6 terms of the series. From the given general formula for an alternating series, we can conclude in the question we have an alternating series. So we start creating the partial sums. That is, this can be expanded as minus 1 by 0 factorial whole power 0 plus minus 1 by 1 factorial to whole power 1 and so on. The point to note here is the first and the second term gets cancelled, so we are left with only 4 terms. But they've asked the error in calculating the sum of first 6 terms. So we write 2 more terms after 1 by 5 factorial. So then we find error. So as you can see in the formula, the error should be less than or equal to the difference of true value and the estimated value. Here b of n plus 1 is the first unused term. Here we stop at minus 1 by 7 factorial. So the next term will be plus 1 by 8 factorial, and that is the first unused or neglected term. So the error here will be less than or equal to 1 by mod of 1 by 8 factorial. We do this here since the given series is very small. If we have a larger or complex polynomials, then we try using Taylor series. The Taylor series, in Taylor series, there is a x term here. But as you can see in the previous one, we did not have any x terms here. It was just a new numbers there. So it was easy to work with those numbers here. When there's an addition of x, the formula becomes more complicated. As you can see here, we can write f of x plus h as f of x, then first derivative into the h. Here h is a small difference here, and f dash of x by h square by 2 factorial, and so on. Here the remainder is given by x minus h by n plus 1 by n plus 1 factorial. So let's take an example of error in Taylor series. So for e power x can be expanded as 1 plus x squared by 2 factorial, and so on. Here they have given the value as x equal to 0. This can be seen the number of terms we use increases and the error bound decreases, and we get a better estimate of the function. So we need to know how many terms do we actually require to get an approximate value of e power 1. The next e power 1. So here our x, f of x is e power x. So we, in the formula here, it becomes f of x plus h will be equal to e power x plus e power x plus h, and so on. So we know that as we increase the term, we get more accurate results here. So if you want to continue finding how many terms it would require to get an approximate value in the magnitude of less than 10 power minus 6. So from the formula of the previous slide here, we see that r power n of x is given by x minus h by n plus 1 by n plus 1 factorial. So they have given at x equal to 0. So it becomes 0 minus 1 by n plus 1 factorial here. Here x is 0 and h is 1 and f of x is e power x. And so the r of n of 0 can be written as minus 1 power n plus 1 divided by n plus 1 factorial into e power c, where c lies between x and x plus h. We take the neighborhood here as in x is a 0. So on the positive side, we can take a 0.000 something. So we take a neighborhood here and c lies between 0 and 0.0000, another small value here. So that's why it is 1 by n plus 1 factorial will lie between the absolute value of our remainder of 0 and e by 1 plus n factorial. So as you can see in the same formula, it becomes e by 1 plus 1 n plus 1 factorial, which is less than 10 power minus 6. So on performing simple calculations, we arrive that we need at least 9 terms to work to find the true error, which is less than 10 power minus 6. As you can see, it gives us a more precise value than directly substituting the value 0 in f of x. So with this, we come to the end of error estimation. I hope there was something which you could take back. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Sridhri. Any doubts with the Sridhri presentation? Anyone wanted to clarify anything regarding error estimation and the things which is detailed by Sridhri? Anyone? If anyone? Okay, if we don't have any doubts, then we'll move on to condition numbers. Vignesh and Vikas.
So yes, sir. I'll share the
Yes.
screen.
Yes, Vignesh.
Good morning, sir. Good afternoon, sir. My name is Vikas Kumar Gupta. Sir, I am presenting about uh, absolute condition number and relative condition number. In if we want in relative condition number of f, the formula is k equals to limit epsilon naught tends to 0, supremum of norm of delta x less than equals to epsilon naught uh, delta norm of delta f divided by norm of f of x divided by uh, delta norm of delta x divided by delta norm of x. Where if delta x is infinitely small, then relative condition number equals to supremum delta x uh, del relative delta norm of delta f divided by norm of delta x divided by uh, norm of f of x divided by norm of x. And if f is differentiable, then relative condition number equals to norm of Jacobian of x divided by norm of f of x divided by norm of x. Vignesh, next, can you? And if we want to find about absolute condition number, then it is represented by k cap, and its formula is absolute condition number equals to limit epsilon naught tends to 0, supremum of delta x less than equals to epsilon naught norm of delta f divided by norm of delta x, where delta f equals to f of x plus delta x minus f of x. And if delta x is infinitely small, then absolute condition number equals to supremum delta x and norm of delta f divided by norm of delta x. And if f is just differentiable, then absolute condition number equals to norm of g of x, where j is the Jacobian of f at x. Weakness. And if we want to find the condition number and at any point, then it is we find relative condition number, which is the maximum ratio of the fractional change in f of x to the fractional change in x, the limit where the change delta x becomes infinitely small. It is the same as the formula that I had read out. And if f is differentiable, then it is equivalent to norm of j of x divided by norm of f of x divided by norm of x, where j of x is Jacobian matrix of partial derivative of f at x. This is the example for a function f of x for two variables question. A function f of x equals to x1 minus x2, where x equals to x1 comma x2 transpose. We use condition number formula k equals to j infinite norm of j infinite upon f of x norm of f of x divided by norm of x, where we put formula values. And if x1 minus x2 is large, then if x1 minus x2 is approximately 0, then by doing a small change, the value of this function become a large change. Therefore, this condition number become ill condition. Oh, thank you, sir.
So am I audible, sir?
Yes, you are audible. Because your portion is over.
Yes, sir.
Fine. Go ahead, Vignesh.
So,
Vignesh Prasad.
good afternoon, guys. My name is Vignesh Prashant. I'll be starting with. I'll be continuing what Vikas left. So I'll be talking about matrix condition numbers. Let's take a vector x, and when we multiply it by a vector matrix A, then it'll be AX. So norm of AX and X are different. Let's take a capital M, which is maximum of norm of AX by norm of X, and small m, which is minimum of norm of AX by norm of X. So these conditions exist for all non-zero vectors which are not singular. So let's look at the definition. The condition number of matrix is given by the capital M, like K of A is equal to capital M by M, which means maximum of norm of AX by norm of X divided by minimum of norm of AX by norm of X. So for condition number of, so if for condition A is singular, which means if A is singular, M will be equal to 0, then we can say that K of A will be equal to infinity. Let AX equal to Y. Let's take an equation where AX equal to Y. M measures how much the matrix can stretch vectors. So the reciprocal of small m is the norm of inverse of A, and I'll explain this. Let's take small m, which is minimum of norm of AX by norm of X. So we can write we know that AX is equal to Y, so we'll write norm of AX as norm of Y, and if we take this equation and multiply it by A inverse on both sides, we'll get X is equal to A inverse of Y. So we'll substitute it here. So this is equal to 1 by maximum of norm of A inverse of Y by norm of Y. So this equation will be equal to A inverse. So the 1 by A inverse. So the ratio of maximum to minimum stretching is the condition number of inverse. So it can be written as K of A is equal to capital M by M. So it can also be written as norm of A into norm of A inverse. Consider a system of equations AX equal to B. And we'll also consider a system of equation by adding an error in B as a delta B, which will also change X as delta X. So think of a delta B as an error in B and as being the resulting error in X, although we need to make we need not make any assumptions that the errors are small. So let's take norm. So because of the definitions of capital M and small m, it will lead to norm of B is less than or equal to M maximum of norm of X, and norm of delta B is greater than or equal to minimum of norm of delta X. So if M is not equal to 0, then we can say that norm of delta X by X is less than or equal to condition number of 8 times norm of delta B by norm of B. So this quantity norm of delta B by norm of B is a relative change in the right hand side, and the quantity norm of delta X by norm of X is the relative change in the solution, that is relative change in X. So we are using relative changes because they are dimensionless quantity, and they are not affected by the scale factors. Like we can't measure two different quantities, so we'll make them into the same quantity by making it a relative change, so we can compare them both. So this inequality shows that the condition number is a relative error magnification factor, which means that changes in the right hand side can cause changes condition number of times the condition as large as the solution. So we look at ill-conditioned and well-conditioned system of equations. That AX equal to B is a system of equations. If there is a small change in A or B gives rise to a large change in the solution vector, then the system of equation is said to be ill-conditioned. If small changes in A or B leads to small changes in solution, then it is a well-conditioned system of equation. We'll look at it with the help of examples. And the system of equations be AX equal to B. Let there be a matrix 1, 2, 2, 3, and the vector x1 and x2 is equal to 4 and 7. Solving the matrix, we'll get x1 is equal to 2 and x2 is equal to 1. We'll get x1 plus 2x2 is equal to 4 and 2x1 plus 3x2 is equal to 7. After solving, we'll get x1 is equal to 2 and x2 is equal to 1. So we'll make a small change in A. We'll add 0.01 to all the values of A. And let's let the vectors be x-1 and x-2. So after solving this, we'll get x1 is equal to 2.003 and x-2 is equal to 0.997. So and we'll also make small change small change in A leads to small changes in the solution. We get this from this. So now we'll make a small change in B. Add 0.01 to both the values. We'll get x dash 1 is equal to 1.999 and x dash 2 is equal to 1.001. So there is small change in solution with a small change in B. So small change in A and small change in B leads to a small change in the solution. So we can say that this equation is this system of equations are well conditioned. Let's look at another example. Let the system of equations be Ax equal to B. Let the matrix be 1, 1, 1 and 1.001 and the vector be x1 and x2. So solving the matrix, we'll get x1 is equal to 2 and x2 is equal to 0. So now let's make a small change in A, where we make it an equal matrix, and when we solve it, we'll see that there's an infinite solution and both the lines are collinear and it has infinite points of contact. But when we make a small change in B, where we add 0.01 to this value, we'll see that x dash 1 is equal to 1 and x dash 2 is equal to 1. Even though we're making a very small change, the change in solution is pretty high. So we can say that this system of equations are ill-conditioned. Use of matrix norms to find the condition of a system of equation. Let's take infinity norm of x is equal to maximum of x. Let's take an example, Ax equal to B. This is the system of equation. When we solve this, we'll get x is equal to 2 and y is equal to 1. So the infinite term of the solution vector of x is given as 2 because we'll take the maximum of x and y. So the infinite term of vector B, which is this vector, we'll see that infinity term of B is equal to 7.99, which is the greatest value among 4 and 7.99. So let's change this B to 4.001 and 7.998. After changing that, we'll get that x dash is equal to minus 3.999 and y dash is equal to 4.000. So let's take change in B, which is delta B. We'll get this value, and we'll take change in x, which is x dash minus x, and we'll get this value. So infinity norm of delta B is this, which is the greatest value among this, and the delta x, infinity norm of delta x is mod of 5.99 minus 5.999, which is 5.999, and infinity norm of B is 7.999, and infinity norm of x is 2. So when we calculate the relative change in norm of B, we'll get which we'll divide norm of infinity norm of delta B divided by infinity norm of B. We'll divide this and we'll get this value. We'll get the 0.000125 and relative change in norm of x, which is infinity norm of delta x by infinity norm of x. We'll get 5.999 divided by 2, which is equal to 2.9995. So change in the solution vector with respect to change in B can be measured as, which means we are dividing the relative change in delta x, infinity norms delta x, and the same for delta V. When we divide, we're getting a pretty high value, which is 23993. So the change in solution vector with respect to change in B is very huge. So we can say that the system is ill-conditioned. Let's recollect the definition of a condition number. The condition number of function measures how much the output value of the function can change for a small change in input argument. And we know that the condition number of A is equal to norm of A into norm of A inverse. So with infinity norm, condition number of A is equal to infinity norm of A multiplied by infinity norm of A inverse. So let's take a final example. Let matrix A is equal to 1, 2, 2, and 3.99. We'll see that mod of A is equal to minus 0.001, and A inverse is 1 by mod of A into the adjoint matrix of this matrix. So we'll get this, and the A inverse we'll get it as minus 1000, 2000, 2000, 2000, and minus 3.99. So when we take the infinity norm of A, we'll get 2 plus mod of 2 plus mod of 3.99, which is 5.99. And infinity norm of A inverse, we'll get as 5,999. So the condition number of A is multiplication of these both values, which is 35988.001, which is so the condition number is very large. So the system of equations is ill-conditioned.
Just a minute, Dinesh, go back.
Yes, sir.
Yes, your adjoint of A is right. Kindly cross-check your adjoint of A whether this adjoint of A is right.
Sir,
We should have Yes, 3.99. It should start with 3.999 minus 2 and 1. Okay, no
Oh,
issues.
yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, it was a good presentation, Vignesh.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. And any doubts from Vignesh and Vikash? Any doubts or other batches to seek with Vignesh and Vikas? Any doubts? Any doubts?
No, sir.
So hope you don't have any doubts. Then I wanted to consolidate the things which was presented by 6 different batches. The introduction, computer architecture, number representation, recursion, error propagation, error estimation, condition numbers. This is what things which was detailed by you all, and the root of linear and non-linear system we were discussed in our class along with the ordinary differential equation. In linear system, we were concentrated on Gaussian elimination, the techniques, pivoting techniques to get the solution, and LU factorization, tridiagonal system, special matrices, and iterative methods, and convergence with the iterative methods concerning the roots of non-linear system. And we have started with bisection, Newton-Raphson method, and interpolations of functions by polynomials, Lagrange's interpolation, triangle family, and even we touched with the numerical differentiation integration, and ODE and PDE, the initial value and boundary value problems we were discussed with Euler and Runge-Kutta methods, and the finite difference method, the minimization problem, least square approximation. This was the content we were discussed in our numerical method class. I think with today's class we can wind up the numerical method classes. Any doubts, any clarifications concerning the first batch? First batch students sent the PPT. Second batch, who is the lead of second batch? Gatika, Google, Kanan, Google.
Sir, I too sent.
Bhargav, send the PPT immediately, Bhargav. Rajulu at nitt.edu.
Yes, sir, I already sent, sir.
I think
A
you
long
sent
day.
the PDF in WhatsApp. I think.
No, sir, PPT I sent to your mail.
PPT. I'll check, and if it is not received, I'll make a post in WhatsApp. Then you send Bhargav. And concerning third batch, who is
Okay,
the
sir.
lead in third batch? Third batch.
Yes, sir, recent, sir.
Yes, Nishant. I think you didn't send. Nishant, you send immediately, Nishant. Today, I'll
Yes.
post it in the Google Classroom, and let your friends will benefit out of the presentation. They will read the things and they can easily reproduce in the examinations. And concerning the fourth batch, I think Pranav and Sanjay.
Yes, sir, I'll just send it, sir. I'll send it. I mean, I sent it on your WhatsApp. Now I'll send it on the mail, sir.
Yes, Pranav and Sanjay. I think from the Siddharthan.
So yes, sir, I sent it now.
Okay. I'll check and I'll let you know.
So
And
only
concerning
mail.
the last, pardon, Siddharthan.
So only in mail you have to send, or
Yes, only in mail. Probably only in mail. You send mail, not in WhatsApp. You send mail. RAJULU at NITT.u. Concerning last batch, Vignesh, Vikash.
So I'll send it now, sir. I'll send the PPT now.
Yes. Thank you, Anandal. Thank you. The thing is, already one or two batches they came to the institution. May I know overall institution?
Sir,
May I know,
myself,
please?
Dakshish, sir.
Yes. Anshu is others.
Sir,
Please raise.
Sushma, I am also in quarantine, sir.
You please raise your hand.
Thanks, பண்றது.
Dakshish. Yes.
Sir, yes, sir.
Dakshish.
Sir, there
Yes.
one doubt, sir. Sir,
Yes,
for
yes.
final semester, what will be the pattern, sir?
But I'll tell you. I think in offline mode, I think you're all already aware about it, right? The end semester is in
Yes, sir.
offline. Am I
Yes, sir.
right?
Yes, sir. That's what I'm asking the pattern, sir.
Yes. Yes, I'll in the meantime, we have time. That is, I think from 1st December you have the offline classes. I think so. In the meantime, I'll make the things clear with the pattern and the timings and all. I'll let you know.
Yes, sir. Because like
Yes, very good, very good.
questions,
Yes,
sir,
Pranav.
because questions like Jacobi iteration and all, like we used to use the Excel sheet for the making the iteration. So if we are offline, we wouldn't be using it. So with that respect, actually, we asked that.
Yes. The formal yeah, which can be attended through offline. That would be the questions. Don't worry about it. Even if it is a question from Jacobi or Seidel, you try to attend with three iterations and you stop with that 3 iteration. Anyway, I usually give choices and you don't worry about it.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yes, someone you make a guest and the things which we discussed and how we did classes. Whether someone you make a note about our numerical methods class. Few seconds. Anyone. Good. I am happy to you to meet in offline mode. See anyone, you please unmute your mic and you make a guest.
Sir, yes, sir. Sir, what should we do, sir? What list, sir?
Guest. I'm asking about the things which we discussed in our class. A brief note about numerical methods. No, I detail na. Recently I detailed, right? What are the things you learned?
Okay, sir. Like, so we started off with like the first class, it was an introduction to numerical methods as to the significance of numerical methods in engineering and all of that. And after that, we started off with solving for roots of linear systems. And in linear systems, we had seen normal conventional methods such as Gauss elimination and value decomposition and stuff like that. And then we went on to pursue, like, apart from the analytical methods, we started doing the numerical methods such as iterative methods for solving linear systems. After the solution of linear systems, we started off with the solution of non-linear systems. Like, we used a few sorts of methods such as Newton-Raphson and all of that. And after that, like, once we had finished that part of thing, we started off with initial value and boundary value problems of ordinary differential of PDEs. Sorry, I mean, like, we studied like the different types of PDEs, elliptical, hyperbolic, and parabolic, and in them, like, we had seen Poisson equation, the Laplace equation, and all of that. We had learned how to solve all of them, the initial and the boundary values. After which we went on to do interpolation problems using the Lagrange forward and backward interpolation. Apart from that, we also used finite difference methods in them. And after which we began our thing with numerical integration and differentiation. After which we actually we went towards the last part of it, the Euler and Runge-Kutta methods for solution of differential equations. And in between all of this, we had also discussed about various current affairs and the situation of whatever had happened a lot of times. And yeah, so that was like a complete overview of what had happened in this particular semester. Thank you.
Yes, it was good, Pranav. Yes, you please conscious with the WhatsApp group, and I'll update you the things with the end semester and other marks and other links, and hope you enjoy the session. Be aware that the offline class is somewhat difficult you are unaware, you are not in offline mode since 19 months, from the 19 or more than 19 months you are in your home. A different approach is essential to cope up with these offline mode and offline classes and offline examination. And that too with our numerical methods, you spend much time with the paper and pen and calculator, and you practice more, and so that you can score more marks in numerical method through offline mode. And thank you, Anandal. If possible, we'll meet. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.